On Farage's policing comments, Dame Priti Patel said, "I've seen the statement and the comments that he has made, particularly around the Black Lives Matter protest, which by the way took place during the pandemic when we had a range of restrictions around protest. There's a clear difference between effectively blocking streets or roads being closed to burning down libraries, hotels, food banks and attacking places of worship. What we have seen is thuggery, violence and racism." So what Priti Patel here is pushing back against this claim that's being made across the right wing as well, being broadcast by Sky News apparently asking Mark Rowley about this, that there is two-tier policing. Now, I've talked about this on stream before, going back and watch my video about two-tier policing from when they had the St. George's Day demonstration. But essentially, where this two-tier policing idea comes from, as Priti Patel has very correctly talks about here, is that people looked at the BLM protests that happened during lockdown and said, well, you're not attacking BLM rioters, even though there wasn't riots in the UK. The Colston statue was toppled, but that's the most actual kind of wide-scale criminal damage that we saw during the BLM riots. And even the BLM protests, even, those were actual demonstrations by pro-Black Lives Matter people. They weren't riots, they weren't going out burning down libraries. They toppled the Colston statue, and then they marched in the street. Sure, this was against pandemic regulations, but then again, we also allowed there to be anti-lockdown protesters gathering, which was against the lockdown regulations, and I think that's fine as well. It's absolutely fine to protest. Protest is a right of even people who I think are very stupid by being anti-lockdown, but regardless, they had their right to do so, and they did. And then people said about the BLM stuff that there was two-tier policing. Why aren't Black Lives Matter protests being treated like Tommy Robinson protesters? This had happened again. This discourse re-emerged during the pro-Palestine protests, which were described as hate marches, right? The actual two-tier is that these are described as hate marches, and the riots we've seen have been couched in the idea of legitimate concerns, for example. That's the two tiers that we've got here. But the fact that the fascist rioters, like people engaging in literal pogroms, are being corralled by the police because they're the in-group, they don't think the police would treat them like that, and they don't know how to protest either. They don't know that when you're supposed to have a demonstration, you alert the police to your demonstration. You have a pre-approved route the demonstration goes down. When you get to the end of the demonstration, you have to disperse so you don't take up too much space, and so the police can know when and where that you actually have marked out for your protest so that traffic can be coordinated accordingly. On top of that, you, as a left-wing protester or demonstrator, you'll receive a briefing from NetPol beforehand, the Network for Police Monitoring, about what powers that they have, what they're going to use, what's against law and what isn't, to make sure that optically every left-wing protest is done in accordance with the regulations so we can minimise optical failures by getting arrested and causing scenes and causing problems. That's the real issue, is that we spend our entire time trying to obey these increasingly draconian laws around protest to ensure that we don't get arrested. Do any of the EDL types, any of the patriotic alternative types, did they look at the Network for Police Monitoring and go, maybe we shouldn't wear balaclavas even though the police can stop us? Like, was it 60AA, I think is the ruling from the Public Order Act from 1994, where they can tell you to remove face coverings and they just completely ignore it, or they get kettled by the police because they go outside of the agreed protest route like they did in the St. George's Day demonstrations and marches, and why they think that they're being treated worse by the police when they're out burning down libraries. You know, this isn't Minneapolis. Leftists didn't burn down any police stations. That didn't happen in the UK, mate. That was in Minnesota. Last I heard, that was not a borough in the UK. So this idea of two-tier policing doesn't exist. And this is being explicitly called out by Priti fucking Patel. Priti Patel is the one who is calling this out, this idea of two-tier policing coming from Nigel Farage, in explicit terms. Like, sure, you don't like Just Stop Oil protesters and Black Lives Matter protesters, but one of them was breaking lockdown rules and one of them was blocking streets, right? They may be bad if you're blocking streets for people. It may be bad for pandemic management if people are violating rules around congregations during lockdown to protest about Black Lives Matter, but that is in no way the same as burning down libraries and throwing rocks at places of worship and doing pogroms against Muslims. And she's right to call this out. Those kind of comments are simply not relevant right now. That is not correct. It is not correct. There's a stark difference between what we've seen over the last week. Over the last week, we have seen the most appalling stabbings in Southport, horrific crimes being committed. We've seen violence and thuggery on the streets. What we saw during the pandemic, we saw protest. We believe in free speech. We saw protests that were being policed. What we're seeing right now is thuggery and disorder and criminality. There's a complete distinction between the two, 100%. And on top of that, there was police brutality. There was police brutality during protests in the pandemic. It wasn't a Black Lives Matter. It wasn't against Just Stop Oil. It was against the Sarah Everard vigil. We all remember the photos of police brutality against Patsy Stevenson at the vigil for Sarah Everard, because it was against the police. There's your two-tier policing, mate. That was an actual vigil. That was an actual vigil for a woman murdered by a policeman. Yet, there are no vigils going on for the tragically murdered girls over in Southport, right? The absolute brutal attack on some little girls in Southport. Where's the vigil that these far-right people who say they care about the children have been organising? No, that was the regular people in Southport that were doing, like all of the rioters say that they cared about. But they don't care about the children, they care about hating Muslims, where they would have to jump on random lies about it being a Muslim in the first place. But it's incredible that with all of these discussions about two-tier policing, are we hearing this from Labour politicians? No, we're hearing it from Priti Patel. Isn't she partly responsible for these riots, given the narrative that she pushed in office? I mean, I would agree that she was. And I agree that her being so explicitly pro-Israel is another reason why we had the demonisation of the pro-Palestine protests, right? Calling them hate marches. And Suella Braverman was just carrying the torch from Priti Patel. I think she's a really strong contender for leader of the Conservative Party. This is clearly something that makes her a dark horse for this. Someone who can represent the acceptable face of conservatism by actually applying, although they're a liberal Conservative Party, the Conservative Party, actually applying liberal analysis to this issue and saying, well, no, we can't have different rules for different people. But what these people are trying to say, that those rules are in favour of minorities and not indeed of fascists, that's not true. She doesn't believe any of this. She just realises that she can't out Farage. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to try and look into her brain. But it's interesting that she feels like she is very happy to outwardly speak about this in a way that plenty of other politicians haven't done, given the kind of conspiracies that we've heard about quote-unquote two-tier policing. Can you have a vigil without bags of cans with the lads? Who knows? Yeah. It is irresponsible to just look what we see on X or other social media platforms and effectively say, oh, it's all down to, comments like this that are being put out on social media. That's got the full facts. It does not, because we have to elected politicians always be careful. Number one, in the language that we use, but ensure that we are fully informed as we can possibly be before commenting on situations, which is why all of us have a responsibility. A real heel turn from the stuff that she was talking about when she was in office, but a welcome one at the very least. If a Section 60AA order is in effect, a police officer can demand that any item you're wearing that is mainly used to conceal identity is removed. Failure to remove the item can result in an arrest. Exactly. This was in place at the St. George's Day demonstrations, and people didn't remove their balaclavas and they got arrested, and they thought they were being treated wrongly by the police, even though that they were acting according with the police powers that were also used against people during Palestine protests too. In fact, we were told in our Netpol briefing to not come wearing face coverings because they were likely to impose a 60AA order against us to get us to remove it and potentially get us having arrested. We were told not to breach this regulation, this guideline, when we were out to protest, because we knew we'd get arrested if we did. It's super simple. Just know what the laws are. It's incredible. It's incredible from the people who say, well, why didn't they just comply if they didn't want to get subject to police brutality, who don't even know the laws that they're supposed to comply with. They can't even be bothered to go out there and research the laws that they should be adhering to when they're going out on demonstrations. It is even more ridiculous for right-wingers to be out here talking about two-tier policing. We've just had the story that broke the other day about spy cops that only ever infiltrated left-wing groups to then rape women by having sex with them and having families and children with them under completely false pretenses as members of the fucking security state. As if somehow a bunch of communists trying to grow tomatoes in their little communes was somehow the problem, rather than people who are out there getting ready to do race riots and pogroms. The spy cop shit is crazy. When was the last time that you saw spy cops against Nazi groups? I mean, maybe they have done and we just don't know, but I'll wait until I have seen evidence to the contrary. I will maintain my position on this. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.